Soul Frame presents.
The silence in our apartment is a carefully curated masterpiece. It's in the precise architectural lines of the furniture Mark chose, in the stark white walls that absorb all sound, in the vast polished floors that reflect our separate lives back at us. I'm 41, an art restorer, married to a man who designs beautiful, empty spaces. It's a fitting profession, I suppose. Our marriage has become his greatest work, a stunning, uninhabitable structure. We live on the 27th floor, suspended in the New York City sky, two ghosts haunting a gallery of unspoken resentments. Mark is a ghost of absences, of late nights at the firm, of a touch that has become a memory. I am a ghost of presence, a silent curator of our shared emptiness. My only solace is in my studio, in the patient, meticulous work of bringing faded colors back to life. It's a small, satisfying irony to restore intimacy to a canvas when it has long since fled my own life. The apartment across the hall had been vacant for months, a dark, quiet mirror to our own. Then, he moved in. His name was Julian. The first sign of him was the music, the low, melancholy hum of a cello seeping through the walls. A sound so full of longing, it felt like an answer to a question I hadn't dared to ask. Our first meeting was a brief, predictable ballet of neighborly politeness in the hallway. But his eyes, a startlingly clear shade of blue, held my gaze a fraction of a second too long. There was a flicker of something in them, a spark of recognition that was both unsettling and, if I'm being honest, deeply intriguing. A few days later, a soft knock on my door. It was Julian, holding two steaming mugs. "I made too much," he said, his voice as warm and resonant as his cello. "It's a single origin from this little place downtown. Thought you might like it." I took the mug, the ceramic warm against my cold hands. The aroma hit me first, rich and earthy, a ghost on my tongue. It was a rare Ethiopian blend, a coffee Mark and I used to drink on Sunday mornings, back when Sunday mornings were a thing we shared. We hadn't bought it in years. "Thank you," I said, my voice tight. "That's very thoughtful." He smiled, a slow, easy curve of his lips. "Just a lucky guess." But it didn't feel like a lucky guess. It felt like a key turning in a long-forgotten lock. It was the first subtle brushstroke of tension on the clean canvas of my loneliness. The following week, the music began to feel less like a comfort and more like a carefully chosen soundtrack. I was leaving for the studio, my hand on the doorknob, when I heard it. An obscure jazz piece, a lazy, meandering saxophone solo that I hadn't heard in over a decade. It was the song that had been playing in the background of a tiny, candlelit restaurant on my first date with Mark. The moment I stepped into the hallway, the music stopped. An abrupt, deafening silence. I stood there for a long moment, my heart a frantic, trapped bird against my ribs. Had I imagined it? The coincidence was too perfect, too cruel. It was a subtle, insidious form of intimacy, a shared secret with a man who was still a stranger. I began to feel a creeping sense of unease, a feeling of being seen, truly seen for the first time in years, and it was terrifying. Our encounters in the hallway became a delicate dance of avoidance and anticipation. I found myself listening for the sound of his door, my body tensing at the whisper of his cello. He had a way of looking at me that stripped away the years, that saw past the carefully constructed facade of the successful architect's wife. One afternoon, we rode the elevator down together. The silence was thick with unspoken things. "That's a beautiful locket," he said, his voice soft, his gaze fixed on the small silver oval at my throat. It was a gift from Mark, from our first anniversary. I instinctively touched it, a protective gesture. Thank you. He tilted his head, a small, knowing smile on his lips. Does it still have the 4 clover inside? The elevator stopped. The door slid open, but I couldn't move. The air had been sucked from my lungs. The locket was soldered shut. The clover, now faded and brittle, was a secret I had never shared with anyone. Not even Mark remembered it was there. I turned to face him, my voice a strangled whisper. How did you know that? The smile vanished from his face, replaced by a look of genuine confusion. Know what? The clover, I said, my voice rising. How did you know about the clover? He took a step back, his hands raised in a gesture of placation. I don't know what you're talking about. I just said it was a beautiful locket. Don't lie to me, I hissed, the sound ugly in the sterile silence of the lobby. The coffee, the music, you're watching me. How do you know these things about me? The look on his face was a masterpiece of bewildered innocence. His blue eyes were wide with a hurt that seemed too real, too profound to be faked. I'm sorry, he said, his voice laced with a genuine concern that cut me to the quick. I think you've misunderstood. He turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, trembling, my reflection a fractured, unfamiliar thing in the polished marble walls. His denial was so absolute, so convincing, that for the first time I questioned my own sanity. Was I so starved for a connection, for any sign that I was still visible, that I was manufacturing these moments? Was the profound, suffocating loneliness of my marriage finally making me lose my mind? That night, sleep was a distant country I couldn't reach. The silence in our apartment was a living thing, breathing down my neck. Around 2 a.m., I heard it, the faint, mournful cry of his cello. I slipped out of bed, leaving Mark a silent sleeping form in the vast expanse of white sheets. I crept to the door and cracked it open. A sliver of light cut through the darkness from across the hall. His door was ajar. I don't know what drove me. A desperate need for answers, for proof that I wasn't going mad. I pushed his door open. The apartment was a mirror image of my own. The same layout, the same view of the city's glittering, indifferent skyline. But it was almost empty, a sterile, transient space. Julian wasn't there. In the center of the room, on a small, makeshift table, was a single, framed photograph. My breath caught in my throat. It was a picture of a woman with my eyes, my smile, the same dark hair falling over her shoulders. She looked so much like me, it was like looking at a ghost. Standing next to her, his arm wrapped tightly around her waist, was Julian. His face was a study in pure, unadulterated adoration. Next to the photograph was an open laptop, its screen casting a pale, bluish light. It was a webpage, an online support forum for the bereaved. And there, at the top of the page, was the most recent post from a user named Julian Cello. His words were a raw, ragged wound on the screen. It's been a year since I lost her, my Anna. We were supposed to move into this building together. We picked out the apartment, 27B. After she was gone, I couldn't let it go. I took the one across the hall, 27A, just to be near the last place we were happy. But now there's a woman living there, in our apartment, and she looks just like my Anna. She wears a locket just like the one I gave her. I think I'm starting to see her everywhere. I think I'm losing my mind. The twist wasn't a malicious stalker. It wasn't a supernatural haunting. The twist was a shared, heartbreaking delusion. I backed out of the room, my hand pressed to my mouth, a silent scream trapped in my throat. He wasn't watching me. He was watching a ghost. He had projected the love and the loss of his dead wife onto me, a stranger who just happened to have her face, her name. The intimacy I had felt, the unsettling sense of being known, it wasn't for me at all. It was for her, his Anna. I stumbled back into my own apartment, the beautiful, empty space that was my life. I looked at Mark, asleep in our bed, his face serene and untroubled. He was a stranger to me, in his own way. And I realized with a sudden, devastating clarity that Julian wasn't the only one living with a ghost. The next morning, I saw him in the hallway. He looked like he hadn't slept, his blue eyes red-rimmed and hollowed out with a quiet despair. He looked at me, and his gaze was different. The unnerving familiarity was gone, replaced with a shared, unspoken understanding. He knew that I knew. In that silent, fleeting moment, a new connection was forged between us. One born not of a manufactured intimacy, but of a mutual, heartbreaking loss. I went to my studio. The smell of turpentine and oil paint was a grounding, familiar comfort. I stood before the half-finished canvas on my easel, a portrait of a woman whose eyes were filled with a quiet, unnameable sorrow. I picked up a palette knife and scraped the paint away. I picked up a brush, dipped it in a vibrant, defiant cadmium red, and began again. The mystery was solved, but the truth had revealed a deeper, more profound mystery, the one within my own life. The encounter with Julian had been a mirror, forcing me to confront the vacant spaces in my own marriage, the faded colors of my own soul. I was still married. I was still living in that beautiful, empty apartment, but something inside me had shifted. For the first time in a long time, I was no longer restoring someone else's masterpiece. I was finally, quietly, beginning to paint my own.